This week, I've got Weapons, which is the latest horror film from writer-director Zach Cregger, and you might know Zach Cregger as the writer and director of Barbarian. Now, I need to caveat a few things before going into the details of this film. If you've listened to my reviews before, you know this. I am not a fan of horror movies because they scare me so much. Like, my imagination just runs wild. I saw Weapons, and then I didn't sleep for a solid week. I wish I was exaggerating. I would wake up almost like every hour in the middle of the night, but freaked out by things that are inspired by the film. But is this because it's a good film, or is this just because I am a giant chicken? I have been trying to figure that out since. The other thing I should note or admit is that I've never seen Barbarian because all of the horror fans and experts in my life, and there are a shocking number of them considering I won't see movies with them generally, they have all told me I cannot handle Barbarian. And I'm absolutely taking them at their word because they generally know my limits. And if they say I generally should not see a movie, I try not to see that movie because, again, the not sleeping thing. And of course, not sleeping does sort of play a part in this film. If you're unfamiliar, the premise of Weapons is that at 2:17 in the morning, an entire classroom full of children, except for one, disappear from this one teacher's classroom. They run off into the middle of the night, and the whole town understandably freaks out because they don't know what's going on. The teacher in question is played by Julia Garner. This also has a pretty strong ensemble cast. You've got Josh Brolin as one of the fathers of one of the missing children. You've got Alden Ehrenreich as one of the police officers in the town. You've got folks like Austin Abrams, Benedict Wong, June Diane Raphael, and Toby Huss rounding out the cast. I think everyone does a solid acting job in this, but like I said, I have yet to be able to figure out if I was somebody who was able to withstand horror films more, would I think this film is scary? And I think the ultimate answer is probably not as much as I did. There are certainly terrifying elements. Just from an academic perspective, there are certain things that as humans we react to, like jump scares. You know, it's not overly reliant on those, I want to be clear. But there are elements of this that are intentionally terrifying. And then there are other parts of it where I'm like, ooh, my own imagination might be stepping up here. So, like I said, I haven't seen Barbarian, so I can't compare them. But I think if you are going to this because you were a huge fan of that, you should probably lower your fear expectation levels. I don't think it's, maybe meant to scare you quite as much as Barbarian. I have read the plot of it because I just had to know. Curiosity was getting to me. Zach Cregger has said that Magnolia is a strong inspiration for Weapons, and you get to see a lot of events from different characters' points of view, which I think he pulls off very successfully. My biggest thing with the film, and again, maybe this is where my lack of expertise in the horror genre is affecting my viewing experience a little bit, in that I wanted to understand the motivations of certain things a lot more, like as things unfolded and as mysteries and surprises happen. I won't go into details, but I was like, I need more lore here. Like, I need to understand what's going on. And I don't think I needed a ton of it. Some of it I can absolutely accept at surface level. But there were certain things that were being implemented that I was like, this would be so much cooler and so much maybe even scarier from a psychological standpoint. Or I could invest more as an audience member from an understanding of motivation, whether or not I support the motivation, from some pretty pivotal parts of it. And so that did feel lacking for me. You could even chalk it up to like base level, intrinsic nature things. But because some things were so bizarre, I was like, I don't know what's happening here, and I can't even assign something to try and fill in the blanks myself. So I do think that potentially the setup of something like Barbarian is unfortunately actually a little more logical and strong, and therefore you are kind of able to invest a little bit more. I was totally able to follow the film without these extra factors, but I think it really would have enhanced it in a way that would have made it more enjoyable. I think like a Robert Eggers is a good person to point to for somebody who builds in like super bonkers lore and motivation that enhances the stories in a way versus this, which is this where it felt like some things might have been left on the cutting room floor. But aside from that, like I said, there are strong performances. There are some very striking visuals. Like I said, was terrified by it. I think I am going to be in the mind. Like, I don't think this is going to keep as many people up at night. I just fall into this weird category there. But, a well-crafted film, especially for a sophomore effort. Like I said, if you're going to this because you saw Barbarian and are expecting similar levels of whoa, like I said, temper your expectations. But if you are a fan of the genre, I think this is a serviceable horror film, to say the least. If you are not a fan of the genre, don't go see it, because if you're like me, you won't sleep after seeing it. How long you won't sleep after seeing it might depend, but I do think it'll get in your head a little bit. I am going to give this, from a craftsmanship standpoint, a 3.9 out of 5. I will never watch this film again, though, because, like I said, I don't need it living rent-free in my brain anymore. The other film I have is called Sketch, and I saw this film almost a year ago, and I saw it at TIFF, and I thought it was so sweet and so creative. The premise behind this one is we are following a family, and they are dealing with, an emotional event and a level of grief, and this girl is, expressing herself through her drawings, and then her drawings fall into this magic pond that makes them basically come to life, and so you have all these, ridiculous monsters terrorizing a town, and they are sketches, drawn by a kid. I think they did such a cool job of visualizing how these creatures would move and how they would terrorize children, basically. It's written and directed by Seth Worley, who started out in visual effects, so it's pretty visually solid and creative, especially for something that was done on a limited budget. It stars Tony Hale as the father of this family. Darcy Carden plays his sister. Then you've got Bianca Bell and Q Lawrence playing Tony Hale's kids. Then a few other young actors like Kaylin Cox, Jackson Kenner, and Genesis Rose Brown, who round out kind of the other children who are stuck in this adventure/perilous situation. I think the thing I really liked about this film is that, a film especially that relies on kid actors can be very challenging if they can't carry it. And I think this film knew when to leverage maybe a few of their acting abilities and when to just be like, let kids be kids. And the visuals of it I thought were really creative. Premise-wise, I enjoyed it. I think the acting is good all around. Now, this is getting into a little bit of the nitty-gritty here, but so then a studio called Angel Studios decided to release this film, and Angel Studios typically do very religious films, and so I think as a byproduct of that, people are going to assume this is an inherently super religious film. When I saw it, again, nobody had picked it up for distribution, I feel like there was a spiritual element, and it's quite probable and possible that Seth Worley has a, religious background, not like super in your face religious background, but it felt like it was gently touching on it, but anybody who is of any faith or no faith at all could still understand and appreciate it. And I worry that there will be an association with Angel Studios that will actually prevent some people from going to see it as a byproduct because they'll think it is actually supposed to be Jesus-y and in your face, which I don't think was the goal or the intention of it. I think spirituality is actually fine in films. I don't have an inherent problem with it if you do it well. And I think Sketch did it well. And spirituality is also being generous. It's just it's just dealing with how do kids and families, deal with the emotional circumstances and situations, and do we grasp onto the ideas of things like monsters and also the afterlife and all this other stuff. It's things that don't have to be hit you over the head with a Bible per se. So I am actually going to just go out of my way to say, hey, this is not the most religious of films, so if you are worried about it because you've seen the other stuff that Angel Studios has put out there, this is one that they didn't make themselves, they just distributed it. I thought it was sweet. It is definitely wholesome, and I had been watching out for it and seeing would it get distribution since TIFF last year, and so I'm pleased for them that they did. I just don't want who the distributor is to maybe get in the way of people enjoying the film. I am going to give it a 3.8 out of 5.